On today's show, big questions for Chris Patrick and the Capitals this summer.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the questions facing the Capitals this summer. Chris Patrick and Brian MacLellan, more specifically, on how they improve this roster. Now, to be clear here, I don't think there's a lot of tinkering that needs to take place as the Capitals won the Metro Division. They won the Eastern Conference. So what things need to change? I'll talk about that a bit later. I'll talk about big fish targets and prospects on the rise. Listen, the Capitals are going to have some cap space that they can go out and try to reel in that big fish. What are some of those big fish and prospects on the rise for the Capitals? A bit later, I'll talk about questions at the center ice position, third line in particular, that we know that we saw Hendrix, Lapierre playing that third line at center position. And the Capitals went out and traded for and acquired Lars Eller, but that wasn't the answer. So what is the answer at the center position? But just to get it going here, overall, overhaul to fine tuning. That is where the Capitals are at right now. Is you take a look at last season, it was more of an overhaul. And a lot of it wasn't by design. You saw Nick Backstrom go on the LTIR, TJ Oshie go on the LTIR, Evgeny Kuznetsov's contract get terminated. And all of a sudden, the Capitals had some money that they could spend. So they went out and signed some of what Brian MacLellan called last summer risky moves. Those moves paid off rather handsomely for the Capitals. If you take a look at Pierre-Luc Dubois, Logan Thompson, Jacob Chychrun, Radish, Duhaime, these kind of players that even though they were dubbed risky moves, well, those were what we consider strokes of genius in hindsight. So when you take a look at what Chris Patrick, current GM, has to deal with, I don't think there are as many holes in the side of the boat, if you will, than there was last season. That, you know, you take a look at what the Capitals accomplished. Listen, they weren't able to overcome a really great Hurricanes team. And one of the things that Chris Patrick talked about in today's press with Brian MacLellan as they addressed the media was that they don't need to try to build the team to face one team. It's not like Chris Patrick is going to go out and try to build a roster to try to compete against the Carolina Hurricanes, that he wants to create a team that is going to compete against the NHL at large, not just the Carolina Hurricanes, but a team that is good enough to win a Stanley Cup. At the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about? And that is what we're going to talk about here. A year after a full-blown roster makeover, this time around, it's all about refinement, not overhaul. And it's kind of a good position for the Capitals to be in, and kind of, it'll be interesting to see how they proceed, as there's not a lot of holes, like I said, in the side of the Capitals boat. You know, the third line, go ahead and take a Sharpie or a highlighter and circle that one. That is the one to really drill down on. The third line in particular is one they want to address. Brian MacLellan and Chris Patrick met with the media after the Caps bowed out in round 2, and the message was clear. We're not starting from scratch. Let's get into what really that means in today's 3-segment breakdown here. First, we're going to talk about, like I said, overhaul to fine tuning. And it's an interesting position. And what is the difference between it? Well, last summer, That was the overhaul, and the fine-tuning is what the Capitals are trying to do now. They are trying to tweak an already great team to make it a team that can combat and beat some of the best teams in the NHL. So let's rewind time to last year. The Caps had just been swept by the Rangers, and let's be honest, a moment that I think all of us would like to forget. And MacLellan, still a GM at the time, promised an aggressive offseason, and he delivered. And what was the big move that we remember last summer? Was Pierre-Luc Dubois. And everyone, if you are a Capitals fan, maybe you had friends that weren't Capitals fans that are like, what are the Capitals? What is Brian MacLellan thinking? Bringing in that guy that was a quote unquote cancer in the locker room, a guy that is, doesn't play all the time. Listen, Pierre-Luc Dubois was an absolutely huge addition to the Capitals. He made Conor McMichael that much better of a player, a great defensive, offensive player just his history and the many great things he's accomplished and his great hockey IQ was responsible with the puck, elevated the players around him. He checked a lot of the boxes. Jacob Chychrun, if we want to recount there, solidified the blue line, a great defender with an offensive flair. Logan Thompson, talk about what he did for the Capitals in a large way, is what put the Capitals in the position that they were in the playoffs, period. Had it not been for Logan Thompson, who knows what it might have meant. And then Duhaime, who added the physical flair, and Radish, who was a great addition as well. But you take a look at it now. Fast forward to now, and the team hasn't just bounced in 5 games by the Hurricanes. Not ideal, but the tone is different this summer. Why is that? Well, here's what MacLellan, now president of Hockey Ops, had to say. He said, quote, "We had some big spots to fill last year. This year, there's fewer holes. We've had some growth in young players. It's not going to be the same as last year," unquote. And I think that if you are a person that follows this team, you got to agree with it. That, I think that, maybe to some people, you think about it that the Capitals made it to the second round and they failed, that maybe you need to just blow the whole thing up. That is not the case. You take a look at Ovechkin, who is going to be ostensibly playing his last year as a Capital, and John Carlson, a lot of question there, that I think this team is facing some bigger changes, not this next season, but perhaps the following season. But the translation about the difference between last summer and this summer is they like what they've got. The core's in place. Now it's about rounding out the edges. And there is some, free agents this summer that with some question marks. Are they going to bring back Mangiapane? We know that Lars Eller is most likely off to the next one. I would like to see the Capitals come to terms with Anthony Beauvillier. Unless there's a better option. I mean, I want to find out what's behind door number 2 and door number 3, to be honest with you. But Chris Patrick, the current GM, emphasized 2 areas. He said, 1, add a skilled forward to complement the top 6. It's like he's listening to the show. That is what I talked about in yesterday's show, is that the Capitals, as is, are a good team, not battle-tested, and many of the players on the current team had not played second-round NHL Stanley Cup playoff hockey, and that was exposed. That maybe if they add a player that has some of that experience, that could go a long way. And the other thing he mentioned about was rebuild the third line, which frankly was a mess. And he pointed to Nick Dowd and that fourth line that he referenced as almost the third line. He wanted to dub it as 2 third lines, just, stating the fact that Nick Dowd is just lights out. And that fourth line is lights out. If you could kind of duplicate that fourth line, third line in quotes, then that would be really great. He even had this to say, quote, "It would be great to have 2 third lines." And so it's going to be interesting to see how that manifests itself and what kind of players that they would like to plug into that third line position. And it's not just the third line vaguely. I think the biggest thing that they need to drill down on is the third line center position. Lars Eller was okay, but he was not great. That's a pretty clear directive. The Caps want depth, balance, and stability. So, you take a look at it. I agree with that assessment. A little bit of tinkering here and there, but maybe not. And later in the show, I'll talk about maybe the Capitals will swing for the fences. I talked about how I feel like they need to add a player, a forward with some experience in some, playoff hockey experience. Maybe a player that has experienced, a deep push into the playoffs, if you will. I think that is one of the missing ingredients that the Capitals are looking for. Not a lot needs to be changed, but if they could tweak just a couple things, I think this team could be truly next level. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about those questions at the center ice position. Who is the best option to play center for the Caps? I'll discuss straight ahead. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. Now, personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether I'm at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost. They're always my go-to snack. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this second segment, I am talking a little bit more about the press meeting that Chris Patrick and Brian MacLellan had today, kind of a state of the Caps. What they want to address in the offseason, their thoughts about what we saw from the Capitals in the postseason and what we saw from them during the regular season and what needs to change. And one of the biggest things that Chris Patrick mentioned was the center position, and that, we got Strome, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and that you got Nick Dowd. But the third line is still a bit of a question mark. So let's take a look a bit more at a granular level about what I'm talking about at the center ice position, because this is where things get interesting. This season started with Hendrix Lapierre getting a shot. It didn't click. They traded for Lars Eller, who added stability but lacked production. Lapierre went to Hershey, and according to Patrick, responded really well. And Hendrix Lapierre, in a lot of ways, they have tried to retread that tire time and time again. And we've seen glimpses of greatness, but no real sustained production. Is next season going to be the season that Hendrix Lapierre figures it out? If you're asking me right now, I think that maybe they want to see what other options, maybe internal options. He said, quote, he's done a really good job of taking what he said to heart, and he's deserving of another opportunity, unquote. He will no doubt be in camp with the Capitals and to see how things all shake out. But it's got to be kind of a tough road for Hendrix Lapierre, is even going into this most current season that we just concluded playing here, is the feeling was that Hendrix Lapierre did make the team, but it just didn't materialize. And that's where it gets interesting. Conor McMichael, who sees himself as a center long-term, even though he played mostly wing this season, he's got 1 year left on his deal and has openly said he wants to sign an extension now. Patrick agrees he doesn't want another offer sheet scare like Edmonton faced. And, to be clear here, I am a big fan of Conor McMichael. If you have listened to this show for the years I've been on here, I've sung the praises of Conor McMichael, that, when he was first here, it needed to be the year of Conor McMichael, because with Peter Laviolette, he did not see the full potential in Conor McMichael like Spencer Carberry did, and he has thrived under the tutelage of Spencer Carberry. So I think if you're asking me, that is the long-term answer at that third line center position. Now, the question then, and Tarek El-Bashir, I believe it was talking about it, that what does that mean for the second line, since he was so lights out with Pierre-Luc Dubois and Tom Wilson, and, we saw, Alexei Protas there as well a bit. But, big picture here, 30,000-foot view, I would really like to stabilize that third line in general, but more specifically, that third line center position. So I think if they can take care of that they can try to then fan out and find a replacement for Connor McMichael on that second line. So that is the big thing there. So the big question is, do the Caps trust McMichael or Lapierre to center that third line, or do they go shopping? And, when I talk about this, oftentimes it's you try to draw conclusions. Like, it seems like Connor McMichael should be that guy. But, last summer, I thought that it was going to be Charlie Lindgren and Hunter Shepard in net. And then guess what happened? Well, Brian MacLellan, doing really what makes him a great GM, is he's like, no, that's kind of an unproven tandem there. I'm going to bring in Logan Thompson. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that Connor McMichael would make an excellent option at that third line center position. But I mean, can you get an upgrade? That's always a possibility as well. I think that the Capitals would be best served trying to address the top six as far as the forwards are concerned. So if they could get, that upper echelon type player with some playoff experience and let Connor McMichael center that third line, I think that would be a good thing there. But speaking of shopping, let's talk salary cap and how the Capitals will have some money to spend this summer. The cap is going up from $88 million to $95.5 million. Add in the $14.95 mil freed up when TJ Oshie and Nick Backstrom's contracts expire. That one of the things they said, do the Capitals want to go out and take a big hack? Yeah, I think they can. In the third segment, I'll talk about some dream list players that potentially they could circle, but I think the Capitals should take a big swing. That you saw what they got done with the lineup this season. Could you imagine if they had an upper echelon producer or an upgrade in that top six, a player that is a proven performer? I think it could be absolutely huge. But that jump, 14.95 freed up, that is serious room to swing big. Will Chris Patrick do it? One of the things that Brian MacLellan said is that, he works together with Chris Patrick still. When I went to see the Capitals play in Minnesota, it was Chris Patrick and Brian MacLellan up in the GM suite up there. So they're still working together. I think they're kind of just letting Chris Patrick, get accustomed to what the job entails. But that Brian MacLellan said that, he'll kind of give his input, but it's ultimately up to Chris Patrick to go out and execute these big moves. I think that it would be a good move for Chris Patrick to put his stamp on this team. I know he has done some of that with signing Chychrun to an extension, Logan Thompson, these kind of things. But to just truly make your mark on this team would be to take a big swing for a big fish this summer. A big hack this summer could potentially be like a really big hack. That opens the door to high-end free agents like Mitch Marner, who I'll talk about in the third segment. But Mitch Marner, how much better would the Capitals be with a player like Mitch Marner on this team? Would he be the guy to help elevate this team to the next level? And, I hate to say it, but, the Toronto Maple Leafs aren't necessarily a team that makes deep pushes into the playoffs either. But a player like Mitch Marner would be a definite upgrade. And the Capitals need to have a mindful eye on that, because you got a guy named Alex Ovechkin that ostensibly is going to be retiring at the conclusion of next season. And those are some big shoes to fill. We could speculate all day long if that's going to be Ryan Leonard, Miroshnichenko, Crystal, these kind of guys. But I think that the Capitals don't want to have a vacuum of power, that if they were smart, that they would have their eyes set beyond just this season, but the following season. about putting this team in a really good position where a lot of this young talent that's been percolating either, in juniors or, in Hershey, those kind of things, that when those players are ready to come into bloom, that this team will be truly next level. That is what is truly got me excited about not only next season, but following seasons as well. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about big fish targets and prospects on the rise. This is dreaming season. Don't be afraid of dreaming of that big name player. You take a look at the Carolina Hurricanes, acquiring briefly, trading for Rantanen. I know that was short-lived, but that's a team that wasn't afraid of swinging and taking a stab at a big player. Do the Capitals have something like that up their sleeve? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in this third and final segment, we're going to talk about dreaming. And on your wish list as a Capitals fan, if there was a player that the Capitals should really seek out this offseason, which player would it be? Don't limit yourself. I know that some people say, well, that could never possibly happen. I referenced the whole Rantanen deal when he went to Carolina and then subsequently out to Dallas. That seemed like a move that was probably not going to happen if you were a Hurricanes fan and then later a Stars fan. But it did happen. And something like that could happen to the Capitals again. See Darcy Kuemper, coming off all he had accomplished with the Avalanche, coming to the Capitals and how that was going to revolutionize the Capitals. That was a big move in its time. What kind of moves do the Capitals potentially have up their sleeve? So let's dive into that in this final segment. The biggest name on the market this summer will be Mitch Marner, right wing, 28 years old. If he leaves Toronto, he'll be the most coveted free agent, an elite playmaker, but huge cap hit, probably north of $11 million. Full no move clause. He's already blocked a deadline trade, but if he's available, the Caps have the cap space and need. How much better would the Capitals be with a guy like Mitch Marner? And some people would say, well, where would he fit? Oh, they'll find a place to fit him into the lineup. Another big name to circle, Nikolai Ehlers, left wing, age 29, speed, production, and fits a top 6 role. If you're asking me, I would circle Nikolai Ehlers. I think that, Mitch Marner, I said not being afraid of dreaming. I think he loves playing in Toronto, and I think that the Maple Leafs love him playing in Toronto, and I think that they'll come to terms with the deal and he will remain in Toronto. I think that Nikolai Ehlers isn't a consolation prize, but I like his game a bit better. The Jets may be forced to move him if they can't re-sign him. More affordable than Marner with a cap hit of around $6 million. So Nikolai Ehlers would definitely be one of my players to circle on my wish list if the Capitals could orchestrate that. And another player that doesn't really fit what the Capitals are looking for as far as the age is concerned is Tavares, center, age 34, veteran leader, still producing at a point per game, likely to take a pay cut, wants to stay in Toronto, but if he hits the market, he'd be a short-term stabilizing ad. And, in a lot of ways, Tavares kind of seems like a prototypical Capitals acquisition. That's, to take to sign a player that has some upside, maybe not necessarily the youngest player, but that's, I guess, where I'd like to see the Capitals change. I think I would rather have them sign a player like Nikolai Ehlers that is a bit younger at 29 years old and kind of break that mold of signing an older player, like a couple summers ago when they signed Max Pacioretty. Yeah, didn't really perform for the Capitals, but I had a pretty good bounce back playing with the Maple Leafs, all things considered. So that would be my guy that I think the Capitals should circle is Nikolai Ehlers if possible. But now let's talk about the players on the rise, the prospects for the Capitals that could potentially make them better next year. Of course, Ryan Leonard, right wing, NHL body and mindset, could be an NHL breakout star next season. I think that that is definitely the case. We saw Ryan Leonard, and he didn't necessarily pop off the page. And one of the things that Spencer Carberry said was very poignant and interesting and insightful is that when you take a look at, he was comparing and talking about the Sharks and how they give their younger players time to grow, because there's no real high hopes for the Sharks, right? He was talking about Macklin Celebrini and some of the younger stars on the Sharks, that they can kind of take their time, because like I say, there's no expectation for the Sharks. The disparity for Ryan Leonard and the Capitals is the expectation is to win. You better go out there and score goals because this team wants to win. So I think the expectation is different. The Capitals have a pedigree of doing great things, of at least making it to the playoffs. They got the one cup under their belt, but the expectation is not to just have the Capitals serve as a developmental league, that the players that are on the team are going to help the team valiantly push for a playoff spot. So that is a fair thing that, I guess I didn't think about until I heard him say it. But it is what it is. We want to see Ryan Leonard do great things. And I think that, if he can have a full season under his belt, you will see him grow by leaps and bounds. Another guy, he's had his opportunities on the Capital is Ivan Miroshnichenko, another winger with an elite shot. Watch for his camp performance. Again, I think he is a shoo-in to break camp with the Capitals next season, but can we see a sustained performance? Some people say a bit. Actually, I say Alex Ovechkin 2.0. Maybe that's slightly hyperbolic, but I think that even Miroshnichenko, once fully engaged, I think can be next level. Andrew Crystal, you can almost kind of put that in the same breath as Ryan Leonard, flashy and fast, and his game has grown by leaps and bounds. He was one of the last guys to get cut from camp. And it'll be interesting to see what we see from him in camp. Has his game grown that much? We saw him with the Kelowna Rockets and the Spokane Chiefs. Has that, what he's learned at those levels, will that prepare him for the National Hockey League, which is something completely different? Cole Hudson, of course, a name to circle. Vincent Iorio, defense prospects who could push for spots soon. And of course, like I said, Hendricks, Lapierre, they're going to try to retread that tire again. And I'm trying to stay optimistic about Hendricks, Lapierre. Oftentimes he was compared to Conor McMichael. And Conor McMichael, once, he did the things that he needed to do, was fully engaged and now is a permanent everyday contributing member of the Capitals. There's no fear there of Conor McMichael getting sent down to Hershey. So Lapierre, if he can break through and just, truly take his game to the next level, I'm loving it. So let's take even another step down and talk about players that are in Hershey. Of course, I talked about Ivan Miroshnichenko, who put up 23 goals. Ethan Frank, who has been on the roster, was a healthy scratch, put up 20 goals. Vecchione, 19. Dubois, 19. Limoges, 17. Bogdan Treniev, 14. That there is some players in the wings, not to mention players that they have there that are percolating as well. I'm talking Chase Prisky on defense. I'm talking Ethan Bear, of course, in Vinny Iorio. So, players that, we've heard about for the longest time. And if you are a Capitals fan and have been for quite a long time, those names that I just mentioned as standout players in Hershey are names that are familiar. But the good news for the Hershey Bears and, by proxy, the Capitals, is that there's going to even be a lot more great players added to Hershey next season. So I think that this team is good right now. I think it is going to be absolutely next level in years to come. And not just the Capitals, the big team, but also Hershey, which is, of course, the crockpot, the developmental league, the American League, one notch down from the NHL, that they're going to be next level. And if the Hershey Bears are good and they have some great players, then those players are just one step down from the big team. And this team is just poised for truly great things for years to come. I'm convinced of it. So it is going to be interesting to see what happens, especially around July and free agency. Do they go out and try to get a Marner, an Ehlers, a Tavares? Those are just like the top three that you hear about. There's many more that'll go into depth, of course, this summer, but it'll be interesting to see what the Capitals need to do. Again, I don't think they need to shake things up too much, but what was apparent in the Capitals, what I'm going to say somewhat early exit in the second round of the playoffs, is they need to tweak this lineup and make some improvements so they can take on the likes of the Carolina Hurricanes and the better teams in the NHL. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.